At Sierra, discover great deals on top brand workout gear, like high-quality bikes, which might lead to another discovery. Getting back in the saddle isn't always comfortable. Good news is Sierra has massage guns. And chafe wipes, too. Discover top brands at unexpectedly low prices. Sierra, let's get moving.
Have I Got News for You is back for another season. Roy Wood Jr., Amber Ruffin, and Michael Ian Black are finding the funny in the week's biggest stories. Have I Got News for You returns Saturday at 9 on CNN and stream next day on Max.
I'm Julia Turner, and this is the Slate Culture Gabfest, the SNL 50th Anniversary Industrial Complex Edition. It is Wednesday, February 12th, 2025, and on today's show, we're talking about SNL's 50th anniversary. We'll be joined by New York Times comedy critic Jason Zinoman to examine the extravaganza of reflection and self-celebration marking the occasion, with a special focus on one highlight, the QuestLove documentary, Ladies and Gentlemen, 50 Years of SNL Music. Then, Flow, the Oscar-nominated Latvian film about a cat trying to survive a cataclysmic flood with the help of a capybara. Also, it's completely wordless. We'll dissect one of Oscar season's most hypnotic and surprising contenders. And then finally, we'll be joined by a Slate staff writer and dear friend of the program, Nadira Goffe, to discuss Kendrick Lamar's halftime show. Was it a stunning political statement, gleefully personal and petty, both, or something else? Joining me today is Steve Metcalf. Hello, Steve.
Hello, Julia.
Steve, did you have a dog in the Super Bowl fight?
Yes, I was rooting against the Chiefs.
Okay.
And that made my dog my enemy. That made the enemy of my enemy my friend. So in that lovely spirit, I watched the Super Bowl rooting for the Eagles.
Well, congratulations to you. Dana Stevens, I will not trouble you with the same question. How are you?
Actually, this is the rare occasion when you should trouble me with that question, because I happen to live with a Philadelphia native whose parents are from Philadelphia, whose grandparents were born in Philadelphia. His entire family still lives there except for him. So it was like Silver Linings playbook in our house. Even though I wasn't watching, I was well aware of the intense emotions flowing. So yeah, we're happy about the Super Bowl.
Wow, did not. I think in my mind, the notion of a football game being on in your home seems like it would short circuit some kind of, cataclysmic vortex. But anyway, apparently we all survived.
There's plenty of sports. Sports are flowing through my home.
Okay, just not your eyeballs.
Exactly.
All right. It seems like it's been the 50th anniversary of Saturday Night Live for at least 6 months. We already talked about Saturday Night, the fictionalized account of the show's first episode back in October. And as the show has ramped up toward the big 50th anniversary 3-hour live special, it will air this weekend. On Sunday night, after rerunning its very first episode in the usual Saturday night slot, the hoopla has become inescapable. NBC has released 2 documentaries about SNL, one by Morgan Neville about the process of making the show, and one, which we'll get into today, by QuestLove about the show's musical guests and their impact. And there have also been many journalistic homages in New York Magazine, GQ, and of course, the New York Times, where some of the stories were written by our guest, Jason Zinoman. Jason, welcome back to the show.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's always such a treat to have you on. I want to start with you, Jason. Obviously, anniversaries can be things that it's good to journalistically skip, but the 50th one is usually one that's worth marking if the subject is interesting at all. And I've had an unusual reaction to this coverage, which is instead of finding it dreary, the more I consume, the more interested I am. But I'm curious how you thought, as a comedy critic and reporter for the paper of record, how did you think about marking this moment, and what might be illuminating about the 50th anniversary of this institution?
Well, the first thing I should say, the reader interest is off the charts. People seem really engaged in this in a way that I don't remember the 40th, which was also a really big deal and it got like 26.5 million viewers. And I think, Saturday Night Live, it's sort of one of these last gasps of the monoculture. And it spans generations. And I feel like it's reached a point now where, I cover comedy, but it almost feels like comedy is the afterthought to Saturday Night Live. Obviously, it's important, but it has so much, it sort of transcends good or bad. It has all this cultural, sentimental meaning. And people associate, eras of Saturday Night Live with parts of their life. I was born a week after Saturday Night Live premiered. So I can actually track my life according to which cast. And a lot of my memories are associated with it in a way that has nothing to do with sketch comedy, but it has to do with this it's kind of been the background of our lives. So there's, certainly at the times we've been covering it, looking at the music, looking at the sketches, but also just looking at the catchphrases that have come into kind of cultural vocabulary, the ad parodies that have become popular, the stars it's made. It's had Lorne Michaels. There's a huge Lorne Michaels biography coming out by Susan Morrison from The New Yorker, and I think whatever you think about him, his achievement of keeping this thing going for 5 decades and keeping it culturally relevant is singular. And so I think in some ways, the last reason that the 50th really matters is he's, in his 80s. It seemed people were talking about his retirement in the 40th. Now it seems like, Father Time is undefeated. I don't think there's going to be a 60th with Lorne Michaels, or I'd be surprised, but who knows? So I think it also has that feeling of this is the last one with Lorne, and then which raises the question sort of what is Saturday Night Live post Lorne Michaels?
Oh man, that's an abyss to stare into. But that's interesting. I love your theory that it's sort of the last gasp of monoculture. And also there's a quality that's like that British series Up, even though we're not actually watching one specific set of people grow up. It's sort of like it's the mirror in which we can remember ourselves growing up or something. If you have any kind of sustained relationship with the show. Steve and Dana, have you, apart from having been forced to think about it when we talked about Saturday Night, the fictional film, which none of us liked particularly, have you guys been, lured in by all of this coverage in advance of us doing it for this segment?
I wasn't until I watched the QuestLove documentary, and then I was drawn in immediately and very intensely. That's an amazing document, as uniquely put together. I mean, you could have made a familiar or rote version of that documentary and it would have been great just because of the archival footage and B-roll or whatever you call it in this context, candid before and after, shit going wrong and having the, hearing the audio in the producer's room when Kanye walks out or pulls some shit on camera. But like the Velvet Underground documentary, which had that quality as well, Todd Haynes made a film, right, about the Velvet Underground, and QuestLove made a film about the interaction of music and comedy and celebrity and anarchy on Saturday Night Live. That really made me confront my biographical relationship to this show, which, like yours, Jason, is highly distinct because I was in, I believe, 6th grade when the first episode aired. And within the first season, I was an avid watcher. I not right at first, but and I'm old enough to remember that it produced one real breakout star that first season. It's so ironic. It was Chevy Chase, the one person for whom the legacy has been most really, really mixed. It's funny for someone like me to hear you call it the last gasp of the monoculture, which I think is brilliant and absolutely true. But my experience is so formulated by the first 3-4 seasons that for me, it was the first gasp of the counterculture on television. And it was daring and weird, and its audience wasn't that big, but it was the right people were watching it at that time. And so I have such a strange relationship to it, which is being old enough to have been exhilarated by it as a breakthrough. I'm perennially disappointed in it as an institution and quite dislike this phase of for example, Complete Unknown. I find very hard to judge independently as a film. To me, it is both a film and a prime document in the boomer, senescent boomer self-mythologizing phase. And I just don't like swaddling something that whose essence was anarchy and the unexpected and a kind of real genuine counterculture. Like weird shit was allowed to happen on that show. I hate when it gets into its Hall of Fame phase, rock and roll in the Hall of Fame and Dylan going electric for the millionth time and comedy. That said, I will say that its peaks were so wonderful just to see Eddie Murphy doing the hot tub sketch with knowing that he didn't want to do it, remembering how incredibly good he was at doing James Brown and Stevie Wonder, how just funny that sketch was. I'd forgotten that aspect of it. The incredible Fred Armisen sketch with punk rock where he's at his daughter's wedding and he's a demure middle-aged man who's asked permission for his reunited high school band to play, or band to play a song at his daughter's wedding. It's incredibly fucking funny. The show was just really great when it was great. I love the work that you're doing on this 50th anniversary. I'm one of the people lapping it up. I wonder if you have any ambivalence about it as an American institution that wouldn't fit into the kinds of things that you're publishing, like just
yeah, I have a lot of ambivalence, but I feel I'm sort of moved past the. I mean, my ambivalence is that and this is sort of the classic thing. Lorne Michaels said that everyone's favorite era is when they're 14.
Of
right?
course,
for me, it was when I was my first year, which was I was 10. Then there's this sort of classic stage where you reject it. It's like a teenager rejecting their parents, right? And that happened for me in my 20s, and I stopped watching it. This is terrible. I missed some good stuff, some of the Sandler, Farley era, and then I sort of came back to it, and I still was sort of as a journalist, I sort of had to follow it. And it felt dutiful. And if you had asked me, I would have a general critique of the media probably like 5-6 years ago, was that we overcover SNL. Yeah. I mean, at the time,
like it's news. It's on the splash page of the New York Times.
We cover it like it's news, and I would bemoan this all the time. It made no sense to me. I've moved past that ambivalent stage, and maybe I'm sentimental. Maybe now I watch it with my kids, and it's something I can talk to with my parents and my kids. There's not a lot of those things left in the culture, but I know. I think the reason is that I know you have a very interesting perspective, and I think an important one, which is the first era. Because you're absolutely right. It was this counterculture thing. It was like Dylan, and people who came after have trouble understanding that, because I feel like. Then there was this sort of weird 5-year period without Lorne. And then I would argue that from then on, it definitely wasn't that, right? It was coasting on that reputation, and it's become not just an institution, but the ultimate comedy institution, the most establishment thing out there, right? And now it happens to be an establishment that constantly regenerates with youth, right? And somehow remains relevant, but I no longer have any sense that this is like a pure comedy. This is the best comedy. This is the structure of the show in itself, I think, prevents it from being the ceiling for being particularly great. So all that said is to say, yes, I understand your ambivalence. I think as if I was to put my media critic hat on, do I sometimes think that we cover it too much? I did, but I've sort of moved past that stage, and now I see, I look up at the culture, and there are not that many things that aren't football that have this wide appeal that is sort of at the water cooler. And as somebody who's lived through, eras of 3 networks and then this very fragmented culture, I've seen the positive side of that, and I'm glad it exists. But I'm going on and on. I'm glad it exists both as something as a consumer of it. I think it's actually quite useful in terms of its giving a platform to artists, and I think including musicians, which is the QuestLove documentary illustrates. So I've maybe I've gotten soft and middle-aged, but I've gotten past my ambivalence, and now I'm grateful.
Yeah, Jason, something that struck me when we were talking about whether to do this as a segment or not, I was thinking, well, does SNL feel too institutional? Have we done it too many times? We just talked about the Saturday Night Movie. And Julia said that her 2 twin sons, Julia, they're 11 years old, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
They're Saturday Night Live heads. They watch it every week. They want to talk about it. So, there's clearly going to continue to be kids coming up. And in fact, I was thinking a lot about children in preparing for this segment, because I wasn't born the week it started, but I was a pretty small kid. And obviously that was before the internet era of virality. But Saturday Night Live went viral on the playground, you know? I mean, you were like the wild and crazy guys or whatever. You know, there were whole years that I wasn't really old enough to either stay up late enough or understand the show, but it trickled down, right, to child culture. So it's something that became viral before there was virality. Documentary tracks that a little bit. I guess as Slate's film critic, it kind of falls to me to say, on a normal week when it wasn't the 50th anniversary of SNL, but this new documentary by QuestLove, who is this incredibly exciting filmmaker, as we discovered with Summer of Soul a few years ago, that would have been a topic in itself that we talked about. So I kind of want to use my question time to just send everyone to that documentary, including you, Jason. I know you haven't seen it yet. And as somebody who knows the history of the show very well, you will be fascinated. It's so beyond your usual kind of talking head. Not that there aren't some great interview segments in it. There are. But, you know, QuestLove is just such a musician as a filmmaker, which we already saw in Summer of Soul. And the way he turns the whole conversation among all the musicians who have appeared on the show into almost like an extended song in itself is just so musical and fabulous. Like, I'm pretty sure that this movie will be on my 10 best list for 2025. I can't imagine seeing 10 better movies this year, certainly not in the documentary space. Maybe with that, we should hear a little bit of this documentary, even though we're talking about more than just the documentary.
Yeah. So the clip we have, I mean, the documentary has so much musicality to it. It opens with this incredible mashup of different performances layered over and on top of one another with great musical ingenuity.
Ladies and gentlemen.
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 Ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen.
Even the way that the descriptions of the show are cut together is sort of like word by word in a way that you never see documentary heads cut together. But this particular moment highlights another fine quality of the documentary, which is just using the archival material really well. So here we hear one of the great musical cataclysms of the show when Ashley Simpson was on and was lip syncing, and they played the wrong track for the second song, and she kind of dawdled around for a few minutes and then ran from the stage humiliated. And you can hear in this clip sort of the audio from the producers as this was happening.
The first song went fine, and then the second song happened.
Once again, Ashley Simpson.
And the two guitarists and the bass all launch into song 2, and the drummer has queued up song 1. And I heard the director say something like, "Holy shit."
Uh-oh. On a Monday. Oh, shit. Wrong song. This is bad. They should play it.
And what you can't see with that audio clip is this embarrassing jig that Simpson did.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you get just a ton of real-time reflection like that in the doc, but you also, I would really send people to it. I mean, for one thing, I would say as a regular watcher of SNL now with my kids and an intermittent watcher over the course of my life, I've never been a huge fan of the musical performances. Like in the show, I'll often fast forward them. Like if it's an artist I know, I'll watch it to see whether it's interesting. If it's an artist I don't know, I'll watch long enough to be like, oh, I guess that's what Morgan Wallen sounds like or whatever. But the documentary, in addition to making this really musical, beautiful viewing experience, really makes an argument about the centrality of music to the show and about the show as kind of a living document of musical culture in America and its sort of effort to find artists who are at the edge of what musical culture is producing. And it's really wonderful. I definitely would send people to check it out. And I don't know if I will watch the 3-hour special live this weekend live, but I think I'll probably watch it eventually.
There was also a 4-part doc about SNL, which I had very low expectations for, but is actually much better than I thought it was going to be, in part because I think one of the benefits of so much being written and done on SNL, including there's been documentaries on SNL in the past, is that you have to come up with an idiosyncratic or eccentric angle. So, or have a real ambition, which sounds like is the case with QuestLove. These documentaries about SNL that they just came out are much more quirky than you'd expect. There's one about just the writer's room, which really has incredible access and is quite interesting. There's one just about like this forgotten season that I'd never really thought much about after the Martin Short season, which has, is considered not a very good season, and it's put like a close spotlight on this overlooked part of its past. There's a lot of it's not like here are the greatest hits of SNL. It's not here are and there's freedom in that, because you're dealing with something so big in SNL, you can get very narrow in a way that I feel like documentaries and journalism aren't allowed to do. So I'd also recommend those on Peacock.
Yeah, that's the series of documentaries directed by Morgan Neville, I think, right? And
right, that's right.
The one about auditions, which I watched some of, is also really fun. I mean, that's a slightly more down the middle topic than the other ones you cited, but it's really fun. It's a little bit like the Beckham structure, where they make David Beckham watch his old games. They don't quite do the same like Errol Morris camera angle, but they basically like force all these comedians to watch their audition tapes, and it's funny to see their responses and whether they're, Stephen Colbert is still kind of proud of his dinky failed audition, and it's pretty wonderful too. Another pretty legendary documentarian there. All right, well, SNL, you're familiar with it. It's turning 50. So much has been done on it, and I think you're right, Jason. Like, actually, the orchestration of the anniversary from SNL and It Must Be Lorne, and they've been clever about it, I think, in terms of what they've offered and how they've offered it and how they've spelled it out. So kudos to them for a pretty sophisticated act of self-reflection and self-celebration. And thank you so much, Jason, for joining the show.
Thanks for having me.
So lucky tonight! Charlie XCX.
Tame Impala.
Lil Wayne.
Justin Bieber.
Rihanna.
Arctic Monkeys.
Oasis.
Lauryn Hill.
Garth Brooks. Metallica.
Here's a little tip for all the music fans out there. Discover is accepted at 99% of places that take credit cards nationwide. You heard right, 99%. And every time you make a purchase with your card, you automatically earn cash back, which means you could earn rewards for those almost front row seats, ride shares to the venue, even that concert merch you've had your eye on since it dropped. If all of that sounds like music to your ears, remember, it pays to discover. Based on the February 2024 Nielsen report, learn more at discover.com/creditcard.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. You chose to hit play on this podcast today. Smart choice. Progressive loves to help people make smart choices. That's why they offer a tool called AutoQuote Explorer that allows you to compare your Progressive car insurance quote with rates from other companies. So you save time on the research and can enjoy savings when you choose the best rate for you. Give it a try after this episode at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates, not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.
Oh, it's such a clutch off-season pickup, Dave.
I was worried we'd bring back the same team.
I meant those blackout motorized shades.
Blinds.com made it crazy affordable to replace our old blinds.
Hard to install?
No, it's easy. I installed these and then got some for my mom. She talked to a design consultant for free and scheduled a professional measure and install.
Hall of Fame son.
They're the #1 online retailer of custom window coverings in the world.
Blinds.com is the GOAT.
Shop Blinds.com right now and get up to 45% off select styles. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Flow was nominated last month for Best Animated Film and Best International Film at the Academy Awards. Directed and co-written by Gintz Zilbalodis, it was made using the free open-source software Blender and recalls Miyazaki in its mysterious and dreamlike fable of a world ending and the animals within it teaming up to try to survive. We thought about playing a clip here, but again, the movie is wordless. So we have a cut of the trailer, but upon listening to it, it's like bing, bong, boom, and then it's like a whoosh of water, and then a cat goes meow. So I think we can save your time with that summary. Dana, as our resident film critic and expert with a specialty in the art of silent film, I'm dying to know, what did you make of Flow?
I mean, okay, first of all, I'm really glad we're talking about Flow as part of our Oscar run-up, because I just want to say that although I really liked it, I can't say that I necessarily absolutely fell for it, and we can talk about why, but I did absolutely fall for the fact that it got all these Oscar nominations. It's such a great kind of Shaggy Dog story for the Oscars, right? To me, it's the Godzilla -1 of this year. Remember last year how that relatively low budget Japanese movie that's this very dark and I would say almost arty take on Godzilla surprised everyone by getting an Oscar nomination for Best Special Effects and then winning. And now Flow, this Latvian, wordless, we'll talk about it, but very, I think, kind of lo-fi and low budget, made with free open source animation software movie, gets all this attention from critics groups, including my own New York Film Critics Circle, gave it Best Animated Film, and it gets nominated not just for Best Animated, but for Best International Feature. Like, that is already a heartening story before you even get to the movie itself. So yay, Flow. I am glad it's out there and people are liking it and seeing it. But having it had it so built up, like, for example, my critics group gave it the award for Best Animated Film before I had even seen it. I kind of went in thinking, like, this is going to blow me away and I'm going to wish that I'd seen it in time to put it on my top 10 and all this stuff. And I have to say that I found it, while extremely beautiful and in parts very, very moving, a little bit meandering, and this quality that one reviewer wrote about, saying that it has almost the quality of an open world video game, you know, which he was saying absolutely is a compliment. I guess as somebody who doesn't play video games, like, I didn't always know how to place myself as a viewer within this 85-minute long, in a way, very contemplative and meditative, but also pretty action-packed movie, right? I mean, it's about a post-apocalyptic world, but it's not your usual post-apocalypse that we see on screen. There's almost no technology, like post-20th century technology, that's visible. And it's this very simple fable about this group of animals trying to survive a flooded world. And we can get into a little bit more of the story of who the animals are and what they do. But it requires a lot of focus from the viewer. It does pay that focus off pretty beautifully, I think. And I got emotionally engaged by the end, but it takes about 15 to 20 minutes, I would say, of this 85-minute movie to sort of learn how to watch it. All that said, I'm going to talk about some of the things I think it does best, and then we can go over to what Steve thought. What I absolutely loved about the animation, which is not as beautiful, nowhere near as sort of visually detailed and beautiful as, say, The Wild Robot, another big animated movie from last year that this one resembles in some way thematically, both kind of about nature and post-apocalyptic survival and collaboration among species. It doesn't look as painterly and beautiful as something like The Wild Robot, but when you consider that it was essentially made for the equivalent of shooting a movie on your iPhone, you know, I kind of like that it didn't look so great. What it does really, really well, I believe, is capture animal behavior. And I want Steve to talk about that because I know that, like me, he's a pet owner. We both have dogs, very old dogs. And there's a dog who's a major character in this movie. But I feel like all the animals are given their own way of being that's not anthropomorphized and that's not cutesified in a way, and I really respected that about the movie. All right, that was a long answer, and it sounds equivocal, but short answer is I really love this, and I'm so glad we're talking about it. Steve, what about you?
Oh, I really cared for it. I think somewhat more than you did, Dana. I was surprised. I only read about the movie after I'd seen it and was surprised to discover many people found it a little alienating in its self-presentation, that somehow it was a little opaque in its plotting, or perhaps the animation was crude and reminded them more of video games in some sense. That wasn't my feeling about it at all. Not because the animation was more painterly or, you know, in the direction of Wild Robot or Miyazaki, or more technically, you know, groundbreaking in the direction of, let's say, Pixar, but it captured what it wanted to capture so beautifully, which is the personality of animals and how the personality of animals displays itself purely behaviorally, right? So it's like a really interesting movie to me in that, I mean, first of all, it's to me completely captivating. It's mystical. You're in this waterlogged, you know, you're sort of in this waterlogged apocalypse, right? This kind of post-human water world. And there are all these suggestive touches that are allowed to remain suggestive. So, for example, when we meet this cat, who's sort of the central protagonist, highly unanthropomorphized cat. It really is meant to look, move, and act like what we all know house cats are like, in ways that are powerfully accurate and evocative. And it brings to mind over and over again that charming quality of cats, which each one seems to always be a cat self-consciously imitating a cat in almost camp style. They're like wildly overreactive. The flow of a cat's body as it arches up its
they're voguing
hackles and they're voguing, right? Exactly. Beautiful. And I thought that the animation was perfectly expressive of that. Anyway, this cat has a backstory that's hinted at in the most wonderfully suggestive and kind of haunting way, which is it returns at one point to a house where it appears to be familiar with. I mean, it must have been the pet of a particular house whose window is cracked, who's deserted. It's among the very few evidences of human life in the course of the film. And it curls up on the bed that I think was probably its bed. And I won't give away what happens next, the reason why it has to leave. But the property is surrounded by and filled with sculptures of varying sizes that I believe are all from wood of that cat or cats in some sense. So the sculptor it's hinted at had some premonition or some feeling or some deep sense of the divinity of this particular animal or its species. So I kind of loved that hinting suggestedness. But what I would say before I turn to Julia is that what I thought the movie as a whole really captured was there's this kind of continuum, if we think about it. There's animal biology, right, which obviously we share with animals, right, non-human creatures, mammals especially. Then there's sort of behavioral, the suite of behavioral attitudes and stances from which we as humans can imagine that an animal has a kind of unified consciousness, right? We understand that an animal has a seat of consciousness, even though a bat or a cat or a butterfly or a lion can't communicate with us. And then the next level up, which is where it starts to get interesting, is they have personalities, right? So any animal that's even been semi-domesticated, you begin to realize has a distinctive personality, is unique to itself. We name a dog, we name a cat, right? And then above that is like kind of self-awareness of a humankind. And then there's language, and then there's culture. And what most animated movies do is they kind of move you along that continuum immediately to language, self-consciousness, and culture, right? They anthropomorphize animals. And what this one does with enormous amounts of restraint is it kind of brings you along. First of all, it keeps biology, behavior, consciousness, and personality highly continuous with one another by using this open sourced animation to make this animal alive and meaningful to you without it edges up to the next step, which is like highly individuated. You know, they're not language users, but they're just becoming tool users. There's some hint There's some hint that the absence of human beings, the bearers of language, self-consciousness, and culture, that their absence is going to create a void that might be filled terrestrially by these animals without, I'm lecturing. The movie doesn't lecture. The movie's wonderful in accomplishing all this in 90 minutes. It's under 90 minutes long, and it was made for very little money. And there isn't the fucking tincture of Hollywood in it in ways that I really admired and really loved. So I cared for this movie quite a lot.
It's interesting that you found all that in it. I love that interpretation of it. I think part of what I love most about the movie is that it's so rich with potential interpretations. And then also as your mind starts wandering off on those potential interpretations, you're like, no, dummy, just watch the animals try to survive the flood. Like it's a movie that can both, you're like, is this a paradox about, is it a parable about climate change and the end of the world? Is it about, division and difference and cooperation and collaboration? You can read it all kinds of different ways. And maybe all of that is intended, or maybe it's just a testament to the art of suspense and tension in storytelling, and how you can create suspense and tension purely visually, just through incident and curiosity and alarm and all of the different tools of suspense and tension. And I loved, all the places my mind went watching the movie, and then also just the images that it came back to. I agree that, the filmmaker Zilbalodis has cited Miyazaki and Jacques Tati and all kinds of potential reference in his creation of the film. Miyazaki does feel right in that the world is so beautiful and that you're sort of following these strange creatures around and wondering about the rules of the universe. But the rendered quality of the graphics is odd and takes a minute to get used to. It's not like anything I've seen in a movie before because it's simultaneously very precise, but also almost a little like pixelated in the movements, or there's a you can see that it's rendered essentially, like it doesn't look painted. And that's also an interesting toolkit to tell a story that's so focused on nature and what happens in the natural world and the natural instincts of beings, like it's I mean, to the degree that it's about the use of tools, here are humans using some extremely cutting edge tools, right, that have been developed through all of the civilization and beyond the civilization that's lost in this film. I mean, the film does seem to be set in a kind of alternate world, but that dissonance is itself kind of resonant, I think, in the film, that like, what it, in the civilization that we're in, here's an animal using a tool to tell this other story about this much more natural world. And I found that powerful. It's like a strangely dense, powerful little object, this movie. And I think that's part of why I loved it, is like, in addition to the underdog story in the awards, and an amazing detail I learned yesterday is that this film won the Golden Globe, I think, for Best Animated Feature. And the filmmaker brought the statuette back to Latvia, and it was like, I think the museum asked if they could display it, and people are like coming to visit a Golden Globe in this Latvian Hall of Culture, which, as someone who's worked on a lot of reporting about how silly the Golden Globes are, I now feel bad about, because that's so wonderful that this country, which has not had a ton of international film honors, is celebrating this victory in that way. I don't know. It's a film to root for, but I think it's also a film to see. I mean, I think I want to watch it again with my kids because they're interested in animation and filmmaking, and the thought that you could say, like, this software is around if you want to go make a movie is pretty cool.
I'm very curious what your kids will think. I was thinking while watching it, everybody in the theater was an adult when I saw it. And it seemed to get a really warm response, including laughter. Like, we haven't really mentioned this, but there's many quite funny moments which have to do with exactly what you were saying, Steve, about just recognizing animal behavior, like the goofy, please love me attitude of the dog, and the kind of, the way the cat just sort of disdains the dog for the longest time. There's more capybara representation than any animated film has ever given us, and we need more capybaras on screen. But I was wondering if a kid had been there. I guess it depends on their attention span, but like I was saying, like, it took me probably 10 to 15 minutes to sort of get with the rhythm of the movie, to sort of understand how to watch it. And I can certainly imagine that a kid who is used to having their eyeballs crammed with Disney product, might find it challenging at first to sit down and watch this movie. It almost might work better with really small kids than with older kids in a way.
I wonder, like less verbal, like sort of.
But it might be scary for them. I don't know.
Yeah, I'll report back. I think we will come back around to it. But we do have to talk a little bit more about those animal performances. The dogdom has never been burned or sent up as hard as in this movie. Like, I just love this like loving portrait of what a doofus idiot the dog is. Like, just charming. And I say this as a dog person and not a cat person particularly. The cat representation. I also loved the kind of alien aloofness of the secretary birds, and there's a beautiful secretary bird conflict that is like stunningly made. And the capybara and the lemur, they all have, I love the way you put that, Steve. They have kind of characteristics as species, and then they have selfhood without having like sassy Disney personalities.
Right.
And
celebrity.
It's just beautiful
voices.
how it's done.
Yeah.
And the observation of animal movement is just incredible.
It's wonderful. That was what really struck me. The other thing that really struck me, and I love the title of the film relative to this, is the kind of weird, unsettling beauty of rising and receding waters plays a huge role that I won't give away in the movie, but the way that is depicted, it's not just that water is both this beautiful and life-giving thing. It's also a quite dangerous thing in this particular landscape. And the way those things blend, the great beauty of water suddenly doing something unexpected, and its potential to just annihilate you. These things are just totally integrated into one another in ways that are just gorgeous. I mean, it's just an amazing film. I'm rooting hard for it. Wild Robot made no impression on me relative to this, but
I would be so excited to see it win Oscars. It would just be the greatest thing for Latvia, and to get people, as you say, Julia, to welcome the idea of having this very lo-fi homemade form of animation that they could work with too.
All right, go Flow, go with the flow, go see Flow. It's Flow from Latvia. You can see it before the Oscars, you can see it after the Oscars. It's in theaters, but you can also now rent it. And so you really have no excuse.
Since you're new to H&R Block, we'll look at your returns from the last 3 years for any money your last guy might have missed, for free.
I could get money back from last year?
You could. We'll find any mistakes.
Could have really used that 2 years ago when I dated that mistake for 5 months.
Don't leave money on the table. Switch to H&R Block and get a free Second Look review. Second Look is included at no additional cost with the purchase of tax preparation. Results vary. All tax situations are different. Fees apply if you have us file an amended return.
Build a routine with Ollie that supports your wellness needs, like getting your daily vitamins and minerals with Ollie's multi-gummies, or keeping your mood upbeat with all the vitamin D in Hello Happy. Give your gut health some support with probiotics, and wake up feeling refreshed after taking Ollie Sleep. Do wellness on your terms. Find Ollie at a Walmart or Target near you, or at ollie.com. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
For our final segment, we're joined by marvelous friend of the program, Nadira Goffe, who wrote on Kendrick Lamar's halftime show at Sunday's Super Bowl, and who is joining us from the closet of her mother's home in what city, Nadira?
Philly, go Birds!
She's wearing green. It's unclear whether she's climbed any greased telephone poles, but there's a radiant glow of excitement and dominance coming off of this shot of the closet, I will say.
No telephone poles climbed. I've got bad knees. That's the only thing that stopped me.
You're too young to have bad knees, but okay. But we will come back around to Nadira's interpretation. But just to set it up for those of you who somehow were not watching, Lamar, who is, of course, the much lauded rapper who's won a Pulitzer, among other accolades, and also just picked up a couple Grammys a few weeks back, was the first rapper to solo headline the halftime show. And his performance featured Samuel L. Jackson as an MC version of Uncle Sam, sort of hectoring and teasing Lamar about whether he'd offend America's delicate sensibilities with this or that performance or song. Lamar had fun, especially playing with the debate about whether he'd perform his hit and now both Grammy-winning and defamation lawsuit-generating track Not Like Us, which, of course, is the maybe apotheosis of his large beef with Drake last year and includes a line calling Drake a certified pedophile. There was debate about whether he would perform the song, that particular line. We can get into what happened there. But first, let's start with a clip. This is probably 3/4 of the way through the performance. And the Samuel L. Jackson character starts by congratulating Lamar for what a nice and genteel rap performance he has been performing and maybe not going there. And suddenly the beat drops.
That's what I'm talking about. That's what America wants. Nice and calm. You almost there. Don't mess this.
Oh no. It's a cultural divide. I'm gonna get it on the floor. You really about to do it? 40 acres in the mule. This is bigger than the music. You really about to do it? Yeah, they tried to rig the game, but you can't fake influence. Think it on it like that. Hey, I'm tripping, I'm sliding, I'm riding through the back like Must that on a beat, bro.
I mean, we all wanted to hear that song. Nadira, you wrote a wonderful piece for Slate about this performance and the double whammy it pulled off. Tell us a little bit about what it was like watching it and what that double whammy was.
Gosh, well, watching it is kind of hard to talk about because it was also in the middle of a very unexpectedly football game, that just the score was not, I think, what anyone thought it would be going into halftime. But I can say that the performance still had all of the energy that I was expecting of a Kendrick Lamar performance, which is not necessarily the energy that I would expect from a Super Bowl halftime performance usually, right? Kendrick has always been a performer that has forefronted storytelling. He's always been a more muted, a more methodical performer. His art has also always reflected that. And I think that this Super Bowl halftime show is just a showcase of that on its biggest, purest scale. I really, really loved it. I know it's maybe not the energy that some people were expecting, but he definitely played with people's expectations in other ways. He gave us, not like us, eventually he did, which is something that a lot of people were wondering about considering the lawsuit. But he also gave us something that he always tries to give us whenever he has a big platform, which is a huge political message. And so, yeah, he's really throwing it all out there.
Yeah, say more about the political message, because I think he also made some interesting choices. I mean, you ask in your piece, and here, I'm going to quote you back to yourself. So get excited to bask in your eloquence. But you write in the piece a question that was on my mind, which is, I know what you may be thinking. If this is such a political performance, why didn't Lamar perform his most political song, All Right, the song that soundtracked the Black Lives Matter protests and has become synonymous with the contemporary pro-Black movement, in front of Trump at a time when the president and his government of cronies have turned all things diversity, equity, and race-related into the ultimate boogeyman? Just to expand on that thought a little bit, I mean, as someone who really admires Lamar and his work and has followed it, but not like to knowing every line of every song, his evolution from that stripe of his performance to the more recent, like, I'm just going to take all of my Pulitzer-winning firepower and just aim it at this random Canadian rapper has been like slightly hard to follow, I would say. So I had that question too, watching the performance of like, this is political. He does talk about 40 Acres and a Mule. He is sort of asserting the centrality of Black culture at this moment when the Trump administration is, I can't even think of the right verb for what they're doing.
Yeah.
Sidelining it, sneering at it, degrading it, deriding it, like pick your terrible verb. So obviously it's a moment of potential confrontation, and the way in which this performance comes at it is so clever and sideways. It's not like a head-on, stand in the street type thing. And so I was curious for your reflections on that choice to not just play the most straightforward political hits from the catalog.
Yeah, I think that Kendrick is always going to be a performer who gives you what you need and maybe not necessarily what you want. And he'll always give it to you in the way that you least expect. He's never really been so outwardly flashy all of the time. He has hits like Humble, like DNA, which he performed both of. But, he's also going to do something a little bit more unexpected. And so I was expecting him to do something political, not only because Trump was there, but just because that's the type of artist he is. I wasn't expecting him to then have Samuel L. Jackson perform as Uncle Sam, to have all of his background dancers be dressed in red, white, and blue, to have them form an American flag. And I think the way that he came at the sort of political message was, instead of trying to really call out America in this sort of grandstanding way, he more so asserts Black people's place within America and their culture within American culture. And I think he does that in such small ways that can be hard to miss. There's a time where he's performing, I believe the song is Man in the Garden, which is not, a huge hit of his. It's very much a deep cut. And he has behind him guys in big white t-shirts and white do-rags and grills in their mouth, just sort of vibing by a light post, by a lamppost. And that's Black culture, right? Like, that's what you do when you hang out, particularly where he's from Compton, from the West Coast. It's, he has this sort of imagery that he injects without performing these sort of big tentpole songs that you would expect because they are political. However, again, he's always doing two things at once, at least two things at once. And so one of the other reasons that it's theorized, at least, why he didn't perform All Right is because some of the other songs he did perform also have sneak disses at Drake, right? So All the Stars, DNA, those are two songs that maybe a lot of people would have expected him to play All Right instead of, but those are two songs that his fans firmly believe also include sneak disses at Drake, right? So he's doing this thing where he's giving us this this coded political message. Well, it's not even that coded at times, but sometimes coded political message that's mostly about asserting Black people's place within a structure, whether it's culture, whether it's politics, whether it's physically, in the country. But then he's also at the same time constantly allegedly taking shots at Drake in a way that's really interesting.
I want to come back around to the Drake of it all, but I want to hear what Steve and Dana made of the performance. Dana, I'm curious what struck you about it.
All right. Well, Nadira covered a lot of what I wanted to talk about, but that does open up some space to talk about the choreography and just the staging, which was what really struck me watching it was that you could not know Kendrick's work very well, as I don't. We've talked about him on the show before and, obviously know about the Drake beef and the big hits. But I think I'm a good test case for somebody who's just sort of like, oh, Kendrick Lamar, like fairly neutral sense of who he is as a performer. And the choreo alone and the staging and the costumes got across
so good.
So much storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely loved, for example, the use of the clown car at the beginning. Mm. Of course, the car itself is a GNX Buick, which is the title of his last album that just won Grammys. But to me, it's just an old joke, right? So it begins with this really witty moment of all these dancers impossibly streaming out of this car. And so you're sitting there thinking about it like a magic trick, like, wow, is there a tunnel under the car? How is this working? And then that flows into what Nadira was talking about, this kind of ironic reuse of patriotic imagery, which really goes along with Sam Jackson as Uncle Sam too, right? That they're red, white, and blue. They're forming a flag at one point, but it all feels like there's a lot of tension behind this patriotic imagery, and it could fall apart at any minute, as it does when there's that incredible, very brief overhead shot of all the dancers splayed on the ground as if they've just been shot, right? And there was this way that you could watch this if you wanted to, as I'm sure many in the stadium did, as just a rousing show, right, with these kind of colors forming and reforming. But when it's all edited together, it's the person at home who's sort of seeing it, turn into a story and a commentary that ends up being a pretty dark one.
Yeah, I just quickly want to shout out Charm LaDonna, who is the choreographer. She's choreographed for Kendrick for the past few years, but I actually, being the sort of dance reporter at Slate, I actually first found out about her in 2019 when she was doing work with Rosalia. And she has always been able to choreograph in a way that's minimal, but enhances effect. It's incredibly effective while being minimal. She focuses on shapes. She focuses on small movements, on hands, on details. And I feel like this was maybe the sort of zenith of showing what that kind of choreography can do, because it gives me chills watching them when they're mostly still, but then they move in a small way or in a big way. And it's like the way that it's paced is just so on point. And I think, like you were saying, Dana, it sort of perfectly underscores what he's trying to say or what he's trying to do, and it kind of both draws attention to them and the movement while not taking attention away from him. And another thing that I didn't actually notice when I first watched it, but notice upon rewatch, is that at one point, and particularly when the moment that you mentioned when they all lay down as if they've been shot, the stage turns into a sort of prison yard. And so they're walking through a prison yard at that moment. And yeah, it's just layers upon layers upon layers. And the choreography is absolutely a part of it.
Yeah, I mean, that was what was so striking to me was the stagecraft and the camera work, because typically halftime shows are funnily anticlimactic and either too frenetic or kind of boring, and it's the conflict, it seems to me, between the two mediums, between the sort of being in a stadium and wanting to go really large to fill a stadium. And people write music with the stadium, the performance in a stadium in mind, and like the grandiosity of a lot of, and the scale of a lot of popular music has been tailored to it for a generation now. And then television's the cold and small medium. And what I thought was amazing is he went cold and small, but he never lost the stadium in some sense. But the camera was really primary. I mean, he was always interacting with the camera. The camera was constantly moving, and the audience sort of disappeared in a way. I felt like crowd noises were somewhat downplayed in the mix
until they sang along with the biggest diss line in the whole song.
That famous moment.
I'ma do my stuff. Why you trolling like a ain't you tired? Trying to strike a chord and it's probably A minor.
Like all that was really extraordinary. And Nadira, there were a couple things I'd love to hear you speak to quickly before we lose you. The first is that particular line that leapt out at me, which is you picked the right moment but the wrong guy.
The revolution about to be televised. You picked the right time but the wrong guy.
How directed at Trump do you think that was, or was that Kendrick Lamar saying, like, maybe I'm not, like, don't turn to me for too much? Or, I mean, I interpreted it right away as a barb at Trump. But and then the second thing is, as someone who has about Dana's level of familiarity with his work, a huge admiration, and I love it. I love his music when I hear it, but I'm not in deep. At what point is it possible that the Drake beef is played, and not just played, in going back to it in front of a live audience and rallying 80,000 people and 100 and some odd million people watching against this guy? What point is that going with the energies of the time and not against them, that there's malice to it and a drive to annihilate the person who's pissed you off?
Yeah, those are two really great questions. The first one, the line, the revolution about to be televised, you picked the right time but the wrong guy, I do think is maybe some sort of double entendre. I think it could have been aimed at Trump. I do more so read it as a Drake slight, mostly because that's the type of thing that Kendrick would say whether Trump is in the audience or not. But, you know, with him, it's never easy to tell. But I did love the line. And I will point out that I think the co-opting of, you know, Black Power imagery and words and phrases like the revolution is about to be televised, I know is sort of a contentious thing. A lot of people do not necessarily believe that, well, most people, I'm one of them, do not necessarily believe that the NFL is a great organization, right? And so to go on their stage and their spaces and to give political statements that some people believe are a little bit milquetoast is definitely something that this performance is coming under fire for. But I do think that there's maybe a sort of more nuanced, larger conversation about I don't know, turning a stage from the inside out and really subverting it and using it to your own advantage, and whether America is ready or deserving of even more complex political moments during the Super Bowl, right? As for the second thing, in terms of the beef itself, I think that this is maybe the zenith of it, and it's kind of very, very clear at this point that Drake has lost. For me, the moment that it actually ends is when Kendrick can no longer say anything new about it. And I think at this point, he has kind of said all there is to say. He's talked about Drake personally. He's talked about his art. He's called him a colonizer for many different reasons, but for mostly his art and the way that Drake approaches Black culture. And I think that there's sort of not much further for Kendrick to go in this space. And so at this point, it feels like if he were to keep it going, it would feel like it had lost that huge momentum and would have sort of stepped into malice. But I think he kind of ended it perfectly at the Super Bowl, the world's biggest stage, the country's biggest stage. And I guess we'll just have to see what both Kendrick and Drake do next after this.
I mean, I can say that watching the reaction to all this online, which is sort of how I experienced the Super Bowl, basically, I was sort of doing my thing in another room. And in fact, Nadira, I think I knew that the Birds won the Super Bowl because of your incredibly effusive posts about it. That was when I had to go downstairs and check whether it was actually true. But I have to say that as an observer of social media during the halftime show, I think that a lot of people joyfully received the Drake diss as a Trump diss. I think those two things felt very woven together in a way that's hard to pull apart. But there was this picture of his smile, right? The thing that went viral was this one still picture of Kendrick sort of walking across the stage with this sneaky smile on his face, right? And of course, in some ways, obviously, that smile would be directed at Drake, the object of his diss track. But I think that the audience really felt it as, you know what, this is, and I think, Nadira, this is in your piece too, even if you don't make the explicit connection, that the piece was about sort of like not just Black joy, but Black hate, you know, like haterade, sassiness, and the enjoyment of that. And that's what the smile was. And it just seemed obvious in the wave of like appreciation and almost catharsis that people felt about that halftime performance, that whether or not it was directed at Trump, the idea of this beef that's about somebody else's inauthenticity, their unethical behavior, you know, their sort of long-time ability to get around all kinds of rules and laws, right? That was clearly something that could stand just as well for the Trump administration and Elon Musk and everything they're currently doing as Kendrick versus Drake.
That's so interesting. I think I read that line Steve asked about in a third way, which is less using Drake as a metaphor for Trump or being about Trump. I almost read it as like, you picked the right moment, but the wrong guy, being about Kendrick himself, that he's like, I don't like part of what I'm advocating for here is the freedom to do whatever I want and not carry the exhausting weight of having to stand up and perform the anthemic song that is like carrying the whole weight of Black oppression in America. Like, I just want to shred this Canadian and like, I want the freedom to just shred this Canadian. And I felt like the amazing moment where Serena Williams, a rumored ex of Drake's, came up and danced, and Crip walked on the stage and was, you know, so just elegant and fun and enjoying her dancing, a dance that she had done at Wimbledon and got chided for its rudeness and impropriety. Like, sort of, I felt like like in the moment I was sort of like that all seemed a little bit sideways. Like, he didn't quite hit the Trump target. And then the more you watch it and the more you think about it, you're like, oh, he's actually advocating something else, which is that articulating almost the exhaustion that everyone feels about trying to figure out how to fight this guy in this moment. And like, what about the freedom to just be your specific excellent self? And if he wants to use his firepower, I mean, I personally am like, enough with the Drake. It's like, seems just weird at this point to be like kicking this guy in the corner when he's been down for months. Like, like, okay, you win. Like, but it is a good song. But that's how I ended up reading it, was kind of like, I don't know, that there's just so many layers you can look at it, but that it was almost about his freedom to come at the moment and the topic totally in his own way without obligation to anyone else.
I think the thing about Kendrick as an artist and the thing about this conversation is that everyone is right. All theories you have are equally plausible and probably equally meant. I mean, I also read the revolution about to be televised, you picked the right time, wrong guy line as him being chosen to perform, you know, at this moment in time. You know, there's so many different ways to read it. And I think that's what's so amazing about him as an artist is, even if you're tired of the Drake, there's the political. Even if you're tired of the political, there's the beef. Even if you're tired of the beef, there's the self, right? There's always something there baked into his art and his performance. He's always working from 5 different places. And yeah, I really loved the show, but I think more than anything else, it's become such a great conversation starter. And it's been a while since I've seen so many people try and just sit down and decode a piece of art before. And so that's the thing that really excites me at the end of the day.
It's pretty great. If you somehow missed it, or you were, dredging the bottom of the guacamole bowl and not really paying attention during the halftime show, it's really worth going back and queuing it up and watching it with your focused attention. Nadira, was such a great piece and such a fun conversation. Thank you as always for coming on. We love having you, and congratulations on destroying the Chiefs almost as much as Kendrick has destroyed Drake.
Thanks so much for having me, and go Birds.
I attribute the victory entirely to your fandom. All right, it is time for the business. Dana?
It is indeed business time, Julia, and our only item of business this week is just to tell listeners about what's coming up on the Slate Plus bonus segment this week. We had Jason Zinoman here. He writes on comedy for the New York Times to talk about SNL's 50th anniversary in the main show. We asked him to stick around because he had a recent really, really fun piece in the New York Times about punchlines, and specifically about shaggy dog jokes that have very long setups for the punchline, and how that's sort of an avant-garde form within comedy. It's existed for a long time, but it's something that he's noticed in a lot of recent comedy specials and stand-up performances. So he has some fun things to say about it. If you're a Slate Plus member, you can hear us talk with Jason about setups and punchlines. If you're not a Slate Plus member, you can sign up today at slate.com/cultureplus. What do you get when you're a Slate Plus member? Well, you get ad-free podcasts, you get bonus content like the segment I just described. Lots of other shows have those kinds of segments too. And of course, you get unlimited access to all of the writing and all of the podcasting on slate.com. Best of all, you keep the magazine going. Without your dollars, we would not be able to get a studio, have a producer, sit down and record these shows. So please, if you want to support Slate podcasts, sign up at slate.com/cultureplus. Once again, that's slate.com/cultureplus, or you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify by clicking Try Free at the top of our show page. All right, back to the show.
All right, guys, now we endorse. Dana, what you got?
All right, I'm going to do two, but I promise that I will make it very fast. I'm only doing two because my first endorsement is local. It's only for New York area people or somebody who's going to be in New York in the next 3 weeks. But I just had to shout out this incredible production of Henry IV that I saw last weekend at the Theater for a New Audience in Brooklyn. It's called Henry IV because it's sort of an amalgam of Henry IV parts 1 and 2 from Shakespeare. Those are, sort of Shakespeare's only sequel, who was doing these two paired plays. This is editing them both together, cutting out a lot of stuff into a 3.5-hour cut that focuses a lot on Falstaff, of course, the most beloved character of that whole Henriade series. And Falstaff is played by none other than J.O. Sanders, who we talked about recently in his 3 daughters.
Oh, God.
He is the father of the 3 daughters, who, in my opinion, steals the entire movie from 3 really excellent actresses who play his daughters. And I think I said on the show when we talked about that movie that I had seen a workshop version of Henry IV a couple years ago with J.O. Sanders as Falstaff. Well, this is the fully developed, costumed, blocked, not workshop version of that same show. A lot of the actors are different, but he is the same. And he is a sublime Falstaff. Like, it's hard for me to imagine a better one. I actually like his interpretation better than Orson Welles' in Chimes at Midnight. Although I love that movie, love Welles' Falstaff. But there's some colors that Jay brings to it that I think are different, a little bit warmer, very vulnerable, just a fantastic reading of an incredibly complex literary character. And the whole show is great. There's lots and lots of great performances, although I would say he is the standout. It's only until March 2nd at Theater for a New Audience in Brooklyn. So if you can possibly make it, it's a small theater. It's selling out fast, but go on their website and see if you can find it. And so that I won't be a local snob and shutting out everybody who doesn't live in New York or can't get here in the next 3 weeks, I will also briefly shout out K.D. Lang's performance in 1989 on Saturday Night Live, which was a musical performance I spent that whole QuestLove doc waiting to see because I love it so much, and it's so radical and anarchic that I was sure QuestLove would focus on it. She may have blitzed by in one of his great montages, but he didn't really focus on this performance. And when she was on in 1989, she sang this song called Johnny Get Angry, which is an old 1962 sort of melodramatic pop song that has some very, very problematic content. It's basically a girl begging her boyfriend to get rough with her, physically rough, to prove that he's a man. And so to have K.D. Lang, this gender-bending kind of figure, she was dressed in kind of rockabilly costume, singing this song from the point of view of a woman, begging her man to beat her. And she really goes all out with the melodrama. At one point is lying on the floor, sort of singing into the microphone. It's a beautiful and wild performance. And you can find it on YouTube. Johnny Get Angry, K.D. Lang on SNL in 1989.
I have not seen that performance. I will have to go check that out. All right, Steve, what are you endorsing?
So I know we talked a lot about Kendrick Lamar and Drake and the beef and the diss track. I just want to say that the category killer, the all-time greatest, most annihilating diss track just dropped. And I really want to shout it out on the show, which is Pope Francis just absolutely leveled J.D. Vance in all but name in response to Vance's tweet about the nature of Catholic fraternity being concentric with the self and then the family and on and on and on. To which Francis has just said, Christian love is not a concentric expansion of interests that little by little extend to other persons and groups. The true ordo amoris, this slightly pedantic concept that Vance cited as by the way, 10-year Catholic convert, decided to lecture the Catholic diaspora, billions of people worldwide, on what the true nature of their faith was as a latecomer zealot of the converted. Indeed. But anyway, Pope Francis, who I think has some authority here as the Pope, said the true ordo amoris that must be promoted is that which we discover by meditating constantly on the parable of the Good Samaritan, that is, by mediating on the love that builds a fraternity open to all without exception. What is there to say? If you can't locate the Good Samaritan parable as the center of Christian faith, you are not a Christian, and J.D. Vance is not a Christian. And this, I should say, is in the context of Pope Francis pointing out that the mass deportation of migrants and all kinds of other forms of discrimination and state-sanctioned violence are obviously flagrantly in opposition to the central fact of Christian teaching, which is the universality of the brotherhood of man. Apologies for the sexist language, but unfortunately that's baked in. So anyway, check it out. I think Francis is representing right now.
Well, on the morning of taping, I did get a push alert from the New York Times telling me we're in the middle of a constitutional crisis, which is, not the best push alert. But I had not seen that from Francis. I will check that out. 2 brief endorsements from me. One, if you enjoyed our conversation about Kendrick Lamar, I would send you to a terrific piece by Craig Jenkins, a wonderful critic in Vulture, wrote about Kendrick's evolution and sort of my favorite line in the piece talks about how he's left the lawful good behind forever and in kind of engaging so deeply with this chaotic beef. And it helped me think through Kendrick's arc for the last decade in a really sophisticated way. So that's Craig Jenkins on the Halftime Show in Vulture. And then more frivolously, have you guys ever tried to make a pom-pom?
No, but I know that's a big kid activity. I remember an era when all of my daughter's friends were making pom-poms. No, tell us about making a pom-pom.
Well, that's my response to a constitutional crisis is a pom-pom. So I am a knitter. I knit hats. I have tried to make pom-poms in the past through various do-it-yourself. You make a cardboard semicircle and you wrap the thingy and you cut the thingy and blah, blah, blah. Every pom-pom I've tried to make up till now is like a sad, flaccid, flopsy little, wilted haystack of dejection. So I felt bad about my pom-poms. But here is where Amazon comes in handy. It turns out you can buy pom-pom making kits, which are like little plastic doodads that I'm sure are bad for the environment. But for the low price of $11 whatever, you can get pom-pom makers in 4 sizes sent to your home. And then it turns out if you merely follow the wordless IKEA-like instructions on the back of the pom-pom maker, you can make a fluffy, robust, rotund, and delightful pom-pom, which is the perfect thing to do if you have chosen to knit your daughter a hat, chosen the yarn for it before she developed color preferences, chosen not to make the hat pink and purple before she decided she was a person who liked pink and purple, and then realized that you could fix the whole thing by making the pom-pom pink to solve for the lack of pink in the hat. Anyway, my daughter and I made a marvelous, fluffy, robust pom-pom thanks to cheap plastic construction and the virtues of Amazon. So just leaning into the end times here, but you too can make a non-flaccid pom-pom if you try. Steve, thank you so much.
Thanks. That was very fun.
Dana.
Thank you, Julia. Good convo.
Very much so. You will find links to some of the things we talked about today on our show page. That's slate.com/culturefest. And you can email us at culturefest@slate.com. Our introductory theme music is by the composer Nicholas Bertel. Our production assistant and our producer is Vic Whitley-Berry. For Steve Metcalf, Dana Stevens, Jason Zinoman, and Nadira Goffe, I'm Julia Turner. Thanks for joining us.
Here's a little tip for all the music fans out there. Discover is accepted at 99% of places that take credit cards nationwide. You heard right, 99%. And every time you make a purchase with your card, you automatically earn cash back, which means you could earn rewards for those almost front row seats, ride shares to the venue, even that concert merch you've had your eye on since it dropped. If all of that sounds like music to your ears, remember, it pays to discover. Based on the February 2024 Nielsen report, learn more at discover.com/creditcard.